of the heart. Gilgamesh is the originating tale in the spiritual tradition of romance as heavenly and divine. Just so in the union with Enkidu does Gilgamesh find favor with Shamash, Lord of the Sun, and is then inspired by him to destroy evils. And from this beginning is led through Enki's great initiation. Enkidu comes to activate the sleeping heart of Gilgamesh, and does so by serving as the focal object for all the king's libidinal attention. Quote, a symbolic figure who attracts libido to himself in the form of wonder and adoration in order to lead it over the symbolic bridge of myth to higher uses. End quote. Psychologically considered then, the story of Gilgamesh describes the advent of homosexual romantic love as the constellation of a figure of the reflection soul. It is the call of the soul to relationship with it, to initiation through the masculine, and thereby to individuate a relationship to God. Eros is a great power, as his teacher Diotima explains to Socrates in the Symposium. Eros is, quote, the intermediary between mortals and immortals, a mighty daimon, dear Socrates, for everything daimonic is the intermediary between God and man, end quote. Eros serves to, quote, interpret and convey messages to the gods from men and to men from the gods, thus bridging the gap between them, so that by his mediation the universe is at one with itself, end quote. Eros is, quote, this is from Jung, and this is Jung's talking about Eros, and he's talking about Plato's version of Eros, which is always homosexual in the Symposium. So every time that Jung is talking about Eros, he's quoting from Plato, Eros is homosexual. Of course, Jung doesn't say that. He doesn't say that. But it's obvious Mitch says that. Mitch reinvigorates and revitalizes Jungian thought with the secret homo-ness that Jung is secretly stealing from Plato, because everything Jung says comes from Plato for the most part, about love especially. Eros is, quote, bold and forward and strenuous. Always devising tricks like a cunning huntsman, he yearns after knowledge and is full of resource, and is a lover of wisdom all his life, a skillful magician, an alchemist, a true sophist. He is neither mortal nor immortal, but on one and the same day he will live and flourish, when things go well with him, and also meet his death, and then come to life again through the force of his father's nature. That's quoted in Jung, but that's Plato talking. So that's the end of that section. We got through the Star from Heaven. Well, I should get some water. That's actually really hard to read that, but also very enjoyable. And I had an interesting memory when I was reading it, because obviously the section is about the celestial, homosexual love as celestial and divine. That's really important. And Eros as the homosexual intermediary between the conscious and the unconscious. And that's really, in a homosexual way, that's really important. And I had an interesting memory when I was reading that, which is when I first called Mitch for therapy in 1989. And I had called a bunch of other therapists. I called Don, and that was really awful. And to see him for an hour. And then I saw Hank Clemens and a couple of other people, which was Mitch called me, and we couldn't communicate because I was acting out some violent shit. I was a reporter for the LA Times, and I was on deadline, and I couldn't take his call. So finally he called, and I took it, but I was on deadline. He didn't talk to me about graffiti or anything like that. He started talking to me about the story of Gilgamesh. And he went on for quite some time, I think for about 45 minutes, if not an hour. And I stopped writing, and I said, this is important. And I said, well, this is a very, some of my Harvard kids, well, why is he talking to you? What does he want? And of course, I said, I don't have a lot of money. He said, oh, money's not the issue. He said, it's very important to find people who want to do serious case in the world. And when I met him, I had a feeling of actually kind of, really, really had a strong connection with him right away when I first met him. And he told me again the story of Gilgamesh. So I was just thinking about that in terms of what got me all into all of this. Appreciating that, and appreciating what he's trying to get into, which is the celestial aspect of homosexual love. And that's why that chapter is called The Star from Heaven. I guess you guys can probably appreciate that, even though we all feel pretty shitty sometimes about ourselves. but that there is some wonderful aspect about gay love that does feel really super special and amazing. I'm going to read now the next section. I think I'm doing okay because that took 20 minutes. And there's two more sections. The next section is called The Sacred Marriage and Fight with Humbaba. Enkidu begins his mortal life as, quote, the man as he was at the beginning. And he gradually civilized and brought to the city. Impelled by his destiny, the soul figure, which is already calling the body, speaking about all of these things introvertedly, as internal experiences. I think it's hard for all of us still, including me, that when we get connected to someone who likes someone we fall in love, that we project the soul figure. We don't realize that we're doing that. But Mitch is talking about it as a real person that I think Enkidu is a real person, but also he's an inner presence, he's an inner being. Impelled by his destiny, the soul figure develops out of the wilds of the unconscious. He gains thought and language in his own ego identity as he assimilates to the conscious life of the personality. Isn't that trippy? The soul figure has his own ego identity. He is enabled to do so through the embrace of a love's goddess priestess, sent unwittingly by Gilgamesh to soothe the hunter's problem, who can soothe and tame even the most wild of beasts. But after her embrace, Enkidu feels a nameless yearning in his heart, mirror of the king's own emptiness. Guided by Ishtar, the two are inexorably brought together. As we have seen, Enkidu comes to compensate the imbalance in Gilgamesh, and to do so is to challenge the ego, which will not change on its own. Their confrontation shapes up in a doorway, appropriate symbol of exits and entrances. There the malicious Gilgamesh and his goodwill double face off. This is itself an archetypal situation, a mystery of the masculine, the fight of the twin opposites. In Egyptian mythology, the brothers Horus and Seth, light and darkness, struggled over the throne of kingship. In the Bible, Jacob and Esau fought over Isaac's patrimony. Mitch is doing this really quickly, but in the Uranian Soul, he collects all of these stories of homosexual. Uranian Soul is the big book that I'm trying to get published that he wrote. He collects all of these images of homosexual doubles and soul twins. It shows how at first they do similar kinds of things as Enkidu and Gilgamesh do to amplify mythologically the experience of the archetypal double. The fight of the twin opposites, a reverse or negative aspect of the double motif, symbolizes the dynamic of archetypal polarity, the conflict of opposites, but it also leads to their harmonious integration. It is through the rough struggle of the twins that the opposites are brought together. The action of the struggle itself works this turn, as it brings about a reversal, a blessing. As it was with Jacob, who, by wrestling with the angel of God all night before facing Esau, wrestled with the angel all night. You should kind of maybe imagine what they were doing. They don't teach you that in Bible class, but it's obvious. Gained a new name from God. Jacob gets a new name from God, as well as the harmony of his brother. The wrestling, the balance, push and pull, brings the two halves of the original wholeness into deeply intimate contact, penetrating further to the core as the struggle is sustained. This is why Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight so long and hard, for the resulting union must be the most thorough, the most heroic. By the time Gilgamesh gains an advantage, the chrysalis of struggle has done its work, and the transmuted content swiftly breaks free, the butterfly of unifying love. Mitch wrote this in the 80s. Obviously, he's deeply inspired by gay love. It's so beautiful, it's so simple, it's exquisite. This libidinal transformation constellate masculine eros in a binding relationship to the soul brother, and such relationship is the greatest thing in the world. It generates a powerfully focused libido that accomplishes anything. The soul brother inspires, empowers, brings the Lord of the Sun, Shamash. The twins' oppositional wrestling is transformed into a propulsive give and take. Their individual strengths are tripled, and Gilgamesh becomes, quote, the figure of the sun hero, the well-beloved. That's from Jung. So Mitch is taking all this stuff from Jungian and homosexualizing it. As Shamash guides the companions to conquer evil, he travels to the edge of the spirit world and makes a name for himself. Such a relationship is sacred and precious, signified by Ninsun's adoption of Enkidu as her son and his induction into the cult of Ishtar. These rituals elevate his status and bring his development from out of the wilderness to new heights as the brother of the king, representative of the fecund great goddess and beloved of the Lord of justice, the bright sun god. Out of this relationship will come fruitful children. Socrates says of this homosexual union, quote, those who are pregnant in body only betake themselves to women and beget children, their offspring. But souls which are pregnant, for there are certainly many who are more creative in their souls than in their bodies, conceive that which is proper for the soul to conceive or contain, wisdom and virtue in general, temperance and justice. And he who in youth was the seed of these implanted in him, and is himself inspired, when he comes to maturity, desires to beget and generate. When he finds a fair and noble and well-nurtured soul, he embraces the two in one person and tries to educate him. And they are married by a far nearer tie and have a closer friendship than those who beget mortal children. For the children who are their offspring are fairer and more immortal. If you ever had to struggle with your internal Islamophobia about this issue, or with clients about, well, I'm meaningless if I don't have children, this obviously this ancient quotation from Plato's Symposium, which is in some ways the Bible in homosexual love, goodness that survived, is a constant reminder that we gay people procreate, have our own form of procreation. Likewise, in Egyptian mythology, the god Thoth, the great shaman, archetypal initiate of the wisdom of God, was said to be the child of Horus and Seth, the son of the two brothers. In the Uranian Psychoanalytic Club, talks a lot about how Horus and Seth fuck each other in the same way he talks about Gilgamesh and Enkidu in this paper. It is a culture-bound notion to believe that only a male-female union can be generative, because in psyche, men too can become pregnant, and children can have two fathers. I thought I would read that again. It is a culture-bound notion to believe that only a male-female union can be generative, because in psyche, men too can become pregnant, and children can have two fathers. Union with Enkidu brings Gilgamesh's relationship with his, quote, star of heaven, the light of God that is within but normally unconscious, that archetype which Jung called the self. This is now a quote from Edward Edinger. The self is the ordering and unifying center of the total psyche, conscious and unconscious, just as the ego is the center of the conscious personality. It is thus the supreme psychic authority and the inner empirical deity. There are a number of other associated terms and images that refer to the self, such things as wholeness, totality, the union of the opposites, the central generative point, the world navel, the axis of the universe, the creative point where God and man meet, the point where transpersonal energies flow into personal life, eternity as opposed to the temporal flux, incorruptibility, the inorganic united paradoxically with the organic, protective structures capable of bringing order out of chaos, the transformation of energy, the elixir of life, all refer to the self, the central source. End quote. Suddenly the life of Gilgamesh has a center, and the life force, quote, the breath of God, end quote, wells up in him. He is possessed by the elixir of wholeness, made passionate and ecstatic by it. How appropriate that this new situation should be symbolized by the friendship of the sun god, since, quote, the sun is perfectly suited to represent the visible God of this world, i.e. the creative power of our soul, which we call libido, and whose nature it is to bring forth, end quote, from Jung. Here is the secret of romantic love. Through its experience gains the sun. The intoxication which emanates from contact with the source of libido is obtained from the marriage with the soul double. The powers of shamanism are always gained and effective through ecstatic trance. And with Enkidu, Gilgamesh has found the perfect method. Their passion raises the power of libidinal transformation, as the Hindus describe the spinal kundalini force awakened in tantric sexuality. Led by the Sun Lord and guided by Enkidu, Gilgamesh can now turn inwards to the spirit world and begin his initiatory quest, the journey into the unconscious. Within the psyche lies great treasures, enriching to the personality if they can be integrated from the unconscious. But the unconscious is guarded by fearsome demons. Ugly feelings, impulses, and experiences, rejected by the ego, combined with undeveloped aspects of the personality into a malevolent form, what Jung calls, quote, the inferior side, end quote, of the psyche, the shadow, quote, all the wants, longings, and fears that have been accumulated down there. A repulsive and sinister sight, end quote. In the journey to become self-aware and self-realized, one must always confront one's shadow unconscious if the opposites of good and evil are to be reconciled. Quote from Jung, the fight against the paralyzing grip of the unconscious